Recently, I felt a bit drained from chess, and I really didn't feel like playing this over-the-board game last night, but I couldn't let the team down, so I rocked up at 7:30 p.m. and immediately realised that I'd prepared for the wrong opponent. The other team had switched their board 1 and 2 over. I play on board 2, and their normal board 1 was playing on board 2, so despite this setback, this game turned out to be one of the most insane games of chess I've played in months. And it's really got me excited for not only my over-the-board game that I have tonight, but also a big tournament which I have coming up this weekend, both of which I will be making recaps of afterwards, so I hope you guys look forward to that. And without further ado, let's get into the madness. So my opponent opened with d4. You guys know what I play. I play c6, inviting my opponent into a Caro Kann, but he goes bishop to f4. Now, although I had prepared against the other guy, this is also what I was expecting from their normal board too. I think both of them play the London system. And I was debating whether I should play the immediate queen to b6, which I have actually played over the board previously. But things get very tricky after like knight f3. You can't really take here because knight bd2. Black is in a bit of trouble. You can, but I don't know, it's not great. Of course, if queen c1, you can just take on d4. But I didn't really want to have to go into all this because I actually did look at this position before the game, and the computer wants to play like this. This just isn't... No, sorry, not like this. After queen c1 like this. And I mean, I don't play these kinds of positions. This is like a check perk defense, and I don't really want to play that. So instead, I played the move d5. My opponent went knight to f3, and then I went queen to b6. My opponent went queen c1, defending and lining up with the bishop. And I knew that bishop g4 was probably the best move in this position. And I knew that knight e5 could be played to, of course, attack my bishop. I believed I could go for this bishop to f5 thing, but I wasn't confident in what to do next, right? White's going to probably go c4, and the computer can tell me this is fine, but I'm not familiar with these positions. So I just went knight to f6, my opponent went e3, I went bishop to f5, just developing normally. We both have really strong grips on the e5 and e4 square, respectively. Bishop to e2. Now, I actually was expecting maybe bishop to d3 here, because this is actually a thing my opponent did later. And after this exchange, I knew this was actually an idea in the London. I believe to try and play the move e5 at the correct moment, supported by the d-pawn. But my opponent went bishop to e2. I went e6, my opponent castled, I went knight b to d7, and here, well, look at this from the white perspective, right? What move would you play here with white? Now, my opponent took about 20 minutes in this position. Most of the previous moves had been more or less blitzed out by both of us. I was expecting c4. This is the move I was looking at, and I thought that I was trying to calculate c5, but I didn't quite think it worked. I thought about taking. I also thought about just ignoring it and going bishop to e7. If takes, I can just take. If c5, I can drop my queen back and I'm probably fine. But c4 looked like the most natural move. However, as you can see, my opponent went knight c3. This is an inaccuracy. And the moment my opponent played it, I was like, what? What are you doing? Your c-pawn can't move, right? Which normally the c-pawn will at least go to c3, if not c4. And the only conclusion I could come to is that my opponent really, really wanted to play the move e4, as we will see later. So the move I should have played here, if you want to, pause the video and try and find the best move for black. The move I should have played here is knight to h5, going after this bishop. Now, I don't know why I didn't go for this. I don't really know. If a move like bishop to g3, I can just take it. The computer even likes h5 here. If, I don't know, say my opponent tries to counterattack my bishop, I can just win the d4 pawn, actually, so the knight can't really move. The computer likes this. And after take, well, after take, clearly black is better because, I mean, although white might have some dynamic play with maybe f5 at the correct moment, these pawns are so weak. But I went bishop to e7, which didn't quite capitalize on the position, but I wanted to just be relatively solid here. My opponent now went bishop to d3, which is why I brought it up before, as in, why did he go bishop e2 and then bishop d3? I asked him after the game why he did it like this, and I don't think he actually had a good answer for that, to be honest. And I spent maybe 25 minutes in this position. Now, the best move is bishop d3. I didn't play this because I was, for some reason, very concerned about the move e4. The computer again likes knight to h5, a move that I didn't consider and I should have considered. I definitely should have considered. Just going after the bishop, of course, e4 is... Oh no, I think I did see this, but I thought that if the queen takes, then white's actually doing quite well. Although b2 is hanging, I can also take here and then take on b2. I missed that. I went knight e4, and this is not the best option. My opponent took with the bishop. The point is you, of course, can't take with the knight because I'll fork your minor pieces. If he doesn't take with anything, let's say he, I don't know, plays rook e1, most likely I'm going to play knight d to f6, and this knight is going to be very difficult to remove. So he takes with the bishop, I take with the pawn, and what I calculated here was knight d2, and I was like, I can't defend this pawn, right? Knight to f6, the bishop can come to a square like g5, and my knight will be removed, and the pawn will be lost. So knight d2, what I was planning on doing was going g5, bishop g3, h5. And my idea was that after h3, h4, bishop to h2, I have very good attacking prospects after moves like g4 at the correct moment. The problem is, white doesn't have to play h3. His bishop is perfectly safe. I had missed from a distance, I'd missed from here, from this position, that after everything that goes on, after everything that goes on, after here, white can just go ahead and take. Because if I go for h4, bishop d6, I missed this. And I couldn't see a way to fight back here for the black pieces. Because if I take, then take, I'm just losing. If I don't take, I mean, what can I do? I can try c5, but just bishop takes, and I mean, my king is completely exposed. So I realized that, and I was like, oh, I've messed up. I've really messed up, because that was my entire plan. My entire plan is just gone out of the window. The computer's move here is c5. I didn't consider this. The point is, after knight takes c4, bishop e4, knight e4, cd4, cd4, queen d4, black may be lacking in development, but this is under attack, so the knight has to be defended, and I can go e5 or I can castle, and I'm fine here. I just didn't consider the move c5. I think I was concerned about taking and getting exposed, or maybe I was concerned about this. That might have been what I was scared of. But I don't need to be. I can just play a move like this, and if take, I just have the bishop pair. Now, I completely missed c5, as I was fixated on the king side, and I played knight to f6. Now, I said before that knight to f6 didn't work because of a move like bishop to e5. And the knight will be taken, and the pawn will be lost. I'm aware. My plan was queenside castle. Very ambitious, I know. The computer deems it a mistake. But this is very difficult to handle with the white pieces, because if you do take here, look at the evaluation. gf6, knight e4, something like h5 or rook g8, let's say. it's getting very difficult to defend the king side, and it's also opposite side castling. I have the bishop pair versus the knight pair. The bishops should probably be better, and although my opponent is of course up a knight, this is a very difficult position. Now the best move in here was h5. The point being, if take and knight takes, I actually do go for the same line, but the pawn wants to go to h4 regardless to stop a knight coming to g3, or go to h3 to try and weaken the king side. So I did it in a slightly different move order. My opponent didn't bite. The best move here was h3, a very difficult move to play. He went for b3. And I saw this move and I was like, what on earth does b3 do? I mean, I was expecting maybe a4. That makes sense. But I was like, I'll just go a5, and b4 can never be played because I have way too much control over that, and this knight will probably hang in most of those lines. That's not a problem. I asked my opponent after the game, what was b3 about? And he said, I don't really know. I was just taking space on the queen side and trying to trap my queen, which, sure, I was looking at lines like, I did go h5 here, by the way. I was looking at lines like knight to a5, what was it? Oh, what was the line? There was some line where both knights got to the b6 square. Something like this. And then like this. And I don't know. Some stupid line like this, which actually mates me. But I'm obviously under no obligation to allow that. If knight here, I can just go queen to a6. And as we'll find out later, my queen is actually very useful on the a6 square. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. And don't worry, the insanity is coming. It is coming. Our times are ticking lower and lower. We're playing faster and faster. And we start to make more mistakes. My opponent went a3 here. And the game is actually in my favor after this. Again, best move is h3. Not very feasible. It just looks like a weakness. It looks like a hook for g5, g4, to be honest. a3. I went for h4. I was very happy with this move. Again, h3 needs to be played, giving the bishop a safe square on h2. My opponent played knight a4. I played queen a6. You can see the evaluation is swinging in my favor. My opponent goes c4. And here, there are two moves for black that give me a big advantage. Try and find one of them. Both of them are good. One of them is slightly better. But try and find one of the moves. Now, the reason the computer is suggesting h3 so often is because the bishop needs the h2 square. And the move here that I played is knight to d7. And you start to realize that this bishop is very, very vulnerable. If you take on g7, rook h to g8. If the bishop goes back to e5, then I will take it and go bishop to h3, and you can't defend the pawn. If you go g3, I'm just going to take your rook. Maybe not even immediately. The computer wants to start with queen to a5, and I think try and get involved in the kingside action, which, as we'll see during the game, is one of the things that was very difficult for me to try and achieve. My opponent here went c5, which is the best move. Oh, and sorry, if the bishop doesn't take on g7, let's say, I don't know, rook e1 is played, then f6, bishop f4, and g5 traps the bishop. And if you try h3 now, then I can take on e5 and probably just win this pawn. There's probably very little you can do about it. It's basically just a very good position. So my opponent went c5, which I thought was a really good move. Point is, if I try and continue with my plan of like h3, or let's say I go f6, right? He goes bishop d6. And as you can see, I have to take. This knight is coming to c5. This knight is coming to c4. And this is actually really difficult for me to defend. The best move here is rook h6. I mean, Yeah, not seeing that. So I have to take on e5, essentially, because I can't allow shenanigans on d6 with this knight. de5. And here, I am very aware that this knight can come to c4 and d6, and there is nothing I can do about it. I have to try to mitigate the damage that that can cause. In this position, I played the move h3. Not the best move. Queen e2 was slightly better. Going after the knight with a very sinister plan. If rook to d1, h3. If g3, I was toying with ideas of taking the knight and trying to sneak in for mate, but it doesn't quite work. But I can just play something like this. And black has way too much pressure with this constant threat looming. Like, you can't just move the knight because queen f3 and you have no way of stopping mate. So I played h3 first. Of course, my plan was g3, queen to e2, attack on the knight, threatening this invasion. And I thought this must be completely winning, and it is. My opponent went knight to c4 after a little bit of a think. And the whole point is that he can't allow my queen into e2. Here I took on g2. You can't take back because of bishop to h3. So rook to d1. I went bishop to g4. I thought this was quite a clever move because I essentially force a rook trade. Rook d8, rook d8. And if the king takes, which it does, that is not a good move. I thought that my opponent had to do basically anything else. If like knight d6, let's say. Take, and bishop to f3, maybe. Well, actually, queen e2 can be played here because the knight moves off of the c4 square. But let's say rook a2. No, then there's this. So queen c2, stopping rook here. Then bishop to f3. And I don't quite have the entire advantage anymore. But this is definitely easier to play with the black pieces, right? I can maybe try and set up some kind of mating attacks on the king in the future. But the problem is that my queen is just completely stranded. My opponent, though, took with the king, which absolutely baffled me. I played bishop to f3. And the king can't go to the back rank because of rook to d8. Sorry, rook d1 check, picking up the queen. I thought my opponent was going to go for this position. I was going to go queen to b5, trying to get out of my cage. And if like rook b1, my queen can't really escape, which is, you know, quite frustrating. And if my opponent just shuffles forever, I'm going to have to start throwing pawns forward to try and evacuate my pieces. But black should be winning, right? Queen versus knight and rook, and with the white king so exposed, maybe a well-timed b6 will allow my queen to shift over to the king side. So, my opponent played king g3. He steps forwards. Here, I spent so long looking for a mate. I just couldn't find it. I went rook h8, and clearly, h3 is the only move here. If white does anything else, then I have bishop h4, king here, and bishop takes f2 with mate, because the bishops block the king from any kind of escape. So, I knew that the only move was h3. And I was trying to calculate ways of lifting my rook to just checkmate the king, essentially. Or force it into some kind of windmill. Like, let's say, here, 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 and, like, taking here. I was trying to force some kind of windmill tactic. Although the computer wants rook g6, king h2. Okay, well, the computer wants to repeat the moves. So, yes, taking on f2 is the better idea. And I obviously win the rook on a2. But the point is, the king gets completely surrounded. I can maybe bring my bishop in as well. And my queen still can't get into the game, but it doesn't matter. What I couldn't figure out, though, is after knight here, bishop takes, pawn take. Well, no, not this pawn, maybe. Maybe this pawn. I couldn't figure out how to deliver any kind of checkmate after the king comes to f4. The computer wants f6. Okay, to play e5, but what if you take like this? Bishop g6, king here. The move is rook to g2, trying to play g5. And if white goes here, then I have rook g4 mate. I didn't see this. This is a bit of a complicated pattern. I was also looking at what happens if king b8, knight f7, rook g6, king here. I again couldn't find the mate, but again there's rook g2 going for g5, knight takes, bishop takes. I missed this. I spent so long and I got down to such low time and I bailed. I went bishop h4, king h2, bishop f2. And I'm still better, but like I actually can't deliver any kind of real attack here. My opponent went rook to a2, a move that kind of baffled me, to be honest. I was expecting knight d6. Rook a2, I went bishop to h4, evacuating my bishop. Rook d2, I went bishop to e7, so that knight d6 can be met with bishop takes, pawn takes. And my queen still can't invade because all these squares are controlled. But I can try and lift her up like this, for example. d7, king d8 loses apparently. I have to go king b8, and the queen controls the d8 square. Very, very complicated stuff, but this is the kind of thing that I was looking at. My opponent instead played queen c2. And admittedly, the annotations got a bit weird from not here. I got under 5 minutes, and I stopped taking annotations because that's just the rules. This is, like a classical chess game. So we have like an hour 20 each with increments. So once you get under 5 minutes, you no longer have to record your moves because it just takes time, obviously. And here I played the move g5 with the simple idea of going g4. And let's say white does, I don't know, a whole lot of nothing. Let's say, I don't know, queen c1, g4. It's very difficult to save your king in this position because I'm coming in and I was calculating lines of like here, 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 and bishop to h4 delivering mate. My opponent went knight c3, going after e4, which I thought was a very good idea. I went g4, and here my opponent finds the best move. Try and defend this position as stubbornly as possible with the white pieces. Pause the video. Try and defend as stubbornly as possible. He played king g3. And I was like, what? How? If I give this check, then king f4. And I can't mate the king. The king slips away. And g3 never works because the e4 pawn will hang. Now, the best move here for black is bishop to h4. And after king to f4, gh3. I saw this, but I rejected it because of knight e4. Bishop e4, if queen takes, bishop e1 wins the queen because the rook is under attack. If king takes, which is the best move, bishop e7, and I try and push the pawn. I think I got spooked by the knight coming into d3 at some point, sorry, d6 at some point, and I thought I can't promote because the rook controls that square. But somehow the king survives. For the time being, although I think bringing the knight in is too dangerous because it gives my queen access to f1. So that probably doesn't work. Something like this and queen f1. This isn't necessarily the best line, but this is too dangerous for white to allow. My king can just come to d7 and is completely safe. I took on h3. I didn't have time. King f4. I couldn't figure out what to do. I went bishop c5, knight e4. And what would you play in this position? What would you play as the black pieces in this position? Well, the obvious move is taking. After queen takes, I can play something like rook to h8. If the king tries to take here, I can take on a3. I can also play a move like queen b5, but I thought the king would be too exposed if it takes this pawn. The move I played is rook to h8. And I played this move, and I pressed my clock, and I was like, oh my god, I've just hung my bishop, and it's worse than that, because my queen has one safe square, and knight d6 forks my king and my queen. And I was about to resign. And then I looked across the table, and my opponent had his head in his hands, like ruffling through his hair, trying to calculate. And I was like, oh my god, he doesn't see it. I thought, well, if I missed it, Then there's a chance my opponent also missed it. We're both in low time at this point. He doesn't realise my bishop is hanging. And there was about 10 or 15 people gathered round watching this game. And I could see it on a few of their faces, but obviously they can't express too much emotion because that would probably be considered cheating, right? If one of the players from the other team were to like give some kind of hint to his player, that would probably kick up some kind of a fuss in terms of cheating, because it's a form of communication, right? You can't do that. A minute goes by, 2 minutes go by, 3 minutes go by. My opponent goes b4. We're back in the game. And what's baffling about this move is that he clearly was looking at my bishop, because b4 attacks my bishop. But the bishop is completely hanging. He goes b4, and when I tell you I was relieved, but there is a lot of work still to be done. Bishop e7. If the knight comes into check, I can go king b8. I can also take. I do have to be aware that f7 could hang, but I think in this position, as opposed to other positions, I was ready to move my king, because if knight takes, I just pin the knight to the king, right? And my opponent can't allow that. So rook d4 from my opponent. Now, sorry, it's from this position that the annotations, basically, my opponent recorded a few more moves because he had a bit more time than me. I stopped recording moves. And a few of these moves may be slightly incorrect, but it's mostly correct. And the essence of the position is exactly the same, right? So apologies if it's a little bit wrong, but it's essentially correct. I took on e4. Probably partially out of PTSD after just hanging my bishop. I decided just to get the knight off of the board. I thought that I can probably convert this position somehow because of how weak the king is. And my bishop, I thought, was just a liability on the f3 square. It wasn't really doing anything. Here, the computer wants to play c5, which is absolutely insane, trying to go queen c6. Never in a million years would I play the move c5 there. That's mental. I played queen to b5. I think I played queen b5. Again, the annotations weren't recorded properly. With the intention of knight d6, bishop d6, you can't take because of queen to f5, king moves, and queen to f3 is mate. So you can't play knight to d6. Rook goes to d4. I didn't really understand why the rook took there in the first place, to be honest, and then just came back. I don't know why he didn't just take with the queen, but okay. Again, c5 is the move. I'm never seeing c5. I played f6. The computer hates this because of a4. My opponent took. Try and find the best move here for the black pieces. This is complicated. Very complicated. And I had about a minute left on my clock. Maybe under a minute. Try and find the move. e5. We sack the f6 pawn, and we sack the e pawn. If the king moves here, the king, of course, can't take because it's protected by the queen. If the king moves, then I just take the rook. So you have to take. You have to take the pawn. Then you can't really take on f6 because of queen to f5. And you're in a lot of trouble. A lot of trouble. The computer thinks this is okay because of queen to f1. There were a few points where I could have gone queen to f1, but I missed them consistently. I should have seen them, to be honest. I should have gone queen f1 here, and the computer thinks I'm completely winning after this sequence of moves. I bring the rook in, and the king just completely runs out of squares. There's loads of ways I can win this position, but this is obviously very convincing. I can pick up the rook, and the endgame is winning because the knight is very awkward and the king is completely exposed. I went rook h5. I was terrified of the queen getting to f5. Again, I must have had about 40 seconds left on the clock. I went rook to h5, attacking the knight and stopping queen to f5. You also can't play a move like queen g6 because I pick up the knight. You can't take my bishop because I pick up the knight and I'm mating you in a few moves. So, after knight my opponent took on g4 with the knight, which is the only move because if you try to defend your knight, I just take on f6. And if you take on g4, again, I have queen to f1. I probably would have missed this in all honesty, but at the very least, I can get a position like this, and my king is just about safe. Just about safe. I can run it to b6, and it can't be attacked. This is pretty much what happened. I took on f6, though. Best move. Brilliant move, according to the engine, but I think that's a little bit too high praise. The point is, the knight can't take because of queen g5 check. If the king goes to e4, I have queen to f5 mate. If the king goes to f3, I saw this far in the position, and I thought I have to be winning here. And I am, because the king just gets completely surrounded. And normally, the queen and the rook can deliver a checkmate pretty easily because they're just very powerful pieces, right? Here, my opponent played queen to e4. I assume... I mean, I don't really know. I assume trying to go to e8. Again, queen f1 is on the cards. Also, these moves may be slightly wrong because, again, this is done from memory. But nothing significant changes in the position. Don't worry. Queen g5. King moves. I know the rook's hanging, but I didn't want to be too premature in taking it because I was concerned about... these ideas picking up the rook, although my queen is actually defending that, so I don't really need to be worried. But I went queen g5 check, which is considered the best move. King went back to g3. I took the rook. My opponent delivered a check. King c7. I, of course, can't block with the queen because my rook hangs. So king c7. Another check. King b6. ed4. Queen h4. I was thinking something like this. I can give a check on h3, but my opponent played king to f4. I have about 30 seconds, and I realize I actually don't have a check. I can do a move like rook d5 and try and go from behind, but I rejected this for some reason. I probably should have gone for this. I went back to g5 with the queen, king g3. And I found a move I was quite happy with, considering how low the time situation was. I went rook h1. The threat being rook to g1. Now, I was expecting my opponent to play king to g2 here. The idea being if I take the knight, you take the rook. And the computer thinks this is winning for black, probably because I eat all these pawns and win the queen endgame. But I don't want a queen endgame. That's too complicated. So, on this, I was probably just either going to move... Oh, no, I have rook h4. Okay, yeah, I have rook h4. And the knight is just completely dead. It's attacked twice, and it can only be defended once. So my opponent went queen to f2. And this kind of surprised me. Initially, I was like, wait, he's just stopped my plan. What am I going to do now? And he's lining up with my king. Queen h4. Queen h4 essentially ends the game. Now, white actually has to be quite careful. King to g2 leads to mate. He went king to f4. I took the queen. Knight f2. Rook to h1. I still have to be careful because there is a knight on the board. But I found an idea I was very happy with. After take, king here, knight to e4. Find the simplest way for black to win the game. Of course, you can take the pawn on b4. But why allow a tricky knight? Rook d3 check. Game over. The king only has 2 squares, right? Because our king is blocking off these squares. After the king went here, I just went rook e3, pinning the knight to the king. The king attacked my rook, sack the rook. King takes. My opponent, for some reason, went to the edge of the board with me. Went king d3, I went b5, cutting off this square, and my opponent resigned in this position. This was an insane game. And there were actually like 3 people who recognized me from this channel and said hi afterwards, which was very flattering. If any of you are watching this video, thank you for saying hi. But yeah, crazy game, crazy game. I can't believe I literally hung a bishop, completely hung a bishop, and neither of us noticed. This game was insane. The way that my opponent managed to just somehow save his king by going to f4. A hanging bishop is missed. So many things going on. Pawn sacrifices everywhere. Piece sacrifices. And I managed to convert the endgame, which I was very, very happy with. And hopefully this shows you why this game was so inspirational for me in a way. Because it showed me that over-the-board chess is fun. It's stressful, but it's fun. And maybe I would be saying otherwise if my opponent had noticed the hanging bishop and I'd lost it there and then. But it would have been a very interesting game nonetheless. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. If you want to see another really interesting over-the-board chess game that I reckon you should watch, check out the video that appears up here. And if you want to see my entire playlist of over-the-board chess game analysis, check out the video down here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.